I guess you're kind of wondering about this, and you're wondering if he's a pediatric surgeon, I don't want him operating on my child. But I wasn't always a pediatric surgeon. In fact, when I started in medical school, I wanted to be a cardiologist. And it was about halfway through medical school, I had my own cancer, a thyroid cancer. And I had to have surgery, I had an operation, and I had a great doctor, and I was cured. And I got hooked. And I said, you know, I want to be a surgeon. I want to fix people. I want to make an impact that way. So I went into surgery, and I wanted to be an adult cancer surgeon. So I went through all the training, and I was having different rotations. And I was about to have a rotation at a children's hospital. I'd never been in a children's hospital. And I was really worried and actually didn't really want to do it because I thought, well, it must be really depressing. There must be a lot of pain, a lot of sick kids. You know, it's not going to be a happy place. I'm not going to have any fun. Well, I got over there and I went into the children's hospital, and it was anything but. There was art, music, kids running around. It was filled with hope and inspiration. And I knew right then that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take care of children. I wanted to help heal them. That's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went into pediatric surgery and went on through my career, but I kept coming up against the same something over and over. And it was, we're not doing enough for our kids. Well, that's the something that I wanted to talk to you about tonight. Our healthcare system is based on some standard thinking that goes something like this. As adults get older, they get more diseases, they get sicker. So that's where we focus our attention in terms of the care we provide, the research we do, the therapies, the treatments, the cures. We make the assumption that because children are basically healthy, they don't need as much attention. Well, I've learned through my 30 years of being a pediatric surgeon, taking care of thousands of kids, operating on many of them, that way of thinking just isn't true, and it just doesn't work. In fact, we could get better outcomes and healthier people of all ages if we focus more on children's medicine. Now, this is a picture of Tyler. Tyler's my patient. Now, I would test you by asking, which one is Tyler? Tyler is actually the adult. He's 30 years old. He works and lives in Maryland. He works in information technology. He's happily married, and he's a first-time dad. Nothing too interesting or crazy about that. But when I first met him, he was 4 hours old, and he was in the operating room. He'd been helicoptered there because he was born with all of his organs on the outside of his body. So when I first saw him on that operating room table, he was no bigger than a grapefruit. His intestines, which were on the outside of his body, were thin and fragile, like pieces of spaghetti. So we operated on him, and I've already shared the spoiler. Tyler did well. He grew up like a champion. But that was after 22 operations, intense therapy, but he has no limitations. And every time now I'm around Tyler, it takes me back to when I first met him, about thinking forward, about thinking what we were going to do in that operation was going to determine the rest of his future, the future arc of his life. And that's the beauty of pediatrics, pediatric surgery, children's hospital. The doctors think forward. They think about what we do today what kind of future is that going to create for that child? What kind of future is that going to create for that adult? And it's a different way of thinking. It's a different set of questions. And what if we took it one step further? What if we had diagnosed Tyler before he was born and corrected the problem before he was born, so we could have eliminated all of those operations and maybe given some of his childhood back? And that's the future. That's the future of medicine, to think forward like that and to create those solutions for children and babies. Now, as I went on through my training and my career in pediatric surgery, I realized that children were getting shortchanged in a lot of other ways. Most of the surgery and operations, and there's so many advances these days, making surgery more precise and less invasive, less painful, but it's all for adults. All the devices and technology are for adults. So when I was doing surgery on children, I would have to use things that were created for adults, whether it was a robot or a scope. And you can just imagine that the problems that that would create. And there were some operations we just couldn't do that way. And let me give you an example. So this is a 3D heart, a 3D reconstruction of a baby's heart. Now, I know some of you may not be able to see that. It's the size of a walnut. So what if this baby needed a pacemaker? What if this baby needed a pacemaker? The pacemaker we'd have to use is an adult-sized pacemaker. And you can see that in many babies, that just isn't going to work to pace their heart. It's just too big. It's made for a 150-pound patient, and we're talking about a small baby. But what if we did it differently? What if we designed a device, a pacemaker, just for babies? And that's what's happening right now at our hospital. There's researchers working on a device, a pacemaker, that's smaller than a vitamin pill that can be used on a baby. And that's the way we need to think. We need to create devices and technology with children in mind. Another example is that most drugs are not created with children in mind. In fact, the drugs we use for colds, for asthma, for even cancer, are not designed to be prescribed. They're not in a formulation for children. They're not even tested first in children. But we're using these drugs for all of the simple conditions and complex conditions. And we ought to turn that around and create a philosophy where we're creating things just for children. Now, I had a new vantage point when I went from being a practicing surgeon and then chief of surgery to becoming CEO of the Children's Hospital, where I'd been working for over 30 years as a surgeon. And I remember a member of the selection committee asked me, we know you're a surgeon, we know what you do with that, but what is the next frontier? What are you thinking about for the next frontier? And it came into my mind just really quickly, and it was all about mental and behavioral health, because I remembered a conversation that I had a week before with a friend, a mother. She had a daughter that had an eating disorder and been struggling with that for years. And she told me the story about how the summer before, her daughter had really been in crisis. So they took her to an emergency department, and they couldn't do anything for her at that emergency department. So they transferred her by ambulance 90 miles to another emergency department. They took care of the crisis there, but they really couldn't create a plan that was going to solve her problem. They took her home, and sadly, her mother told me she passed away a few months after that. And I reached out to give her a hug because I knew she wasn't alone. This was an all too frequent story. It's kept under the covers, but there's so many kids with mental and behavioral health issues. So this had to be the next frontier. So I began researching it, and I learned that from the time a child begins showing signs of mental or behavioral health issues, from the time they started, it would take 8 years on average before it was diagnosed. 8 years. Think about what's happening in that 8 years. And then even after it's diagnosed, most of the parents and families, there's no treatment or solutions for many of these kids. And I know we can do more. I know that we can find interventions to identify these things much earlier, that we can train more doctors, more psychiatrists, more psychologists, and we can do more research to find out what are the causes and create individualized approaches, personalized approaches for these mental illnesses, which are diseases. I know we can do more. And what if we applied that approach to other chronic diseases of childhood? Things like obesity, asthma, diabetes. We can tackle all of those things with these approaches and make huge strides. And what if we took it even further? What if we used all the genetic research that's going on and eliminated these hereditary diseases before they even get started? And there's another way to look at it too. Think about all the adult diseases that get started in childhood. Things like heart attacks, stroke, cancer. We can have a chance of eliminating all of these things if we just think differently and focus on children. So all along the way of my career, I've learned so much, and it's so much fun to learn these things. And I just see how much more we can do, how much more we can do for our children. That's what we need to do as a legacy. We need to think forward for those individuals like Tyler and be thinking about their best future and creating that best future. We need to be thinking about innovation and devices and technology with children in mind from the beginning. And we need to invest in more research and research on children's diseases so that we can make huge strides and stamp out these diseases before they even surface. What a great vision of the future to do more for our children. What a great legacy. I know we can make that kind of a difference. And I just leave you with the thought, children aren't that big a part of our population, maybe 20%, but they're 100% of our future. Thank you.